Hi, I'm Shinhee Son, Director of Organic Search here at Augurian, and what I'm going to be talking about today is site migrations. The different types, the different factors, and also the considerations for each of those. So, if you've been in this position or already in this position right now, you've got the higher ups and they're saying, we need a new design, we need a new brand, we need new content, we just need to refresh this, it's been 6 months, it looks stale, let's try to modernize this. And they give you this request, and you are now leading this charge. So obviously there's going to be a ton of pressure because there's so much changing, so much on the hook here. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. So what I'm going to do is try to address some of those things so you feel a little bit more equipped to set the right expectations and figure out who you might need to focus on the things and the areas that I'm going to bring up here. So the first thing that I really wanted to call out with these site migrations is the URL, just in general. The URL is essentially the search engines or the people's identification of a specific page or of the website. So it's almost the equivalent of, let's just say you moved and your address has changed. Well, then there's a lot that goes into that. So I wanted to base this conversation around the URL because it's really important. And so you can see here how I sort of split them out. So if the URL changes because it's so important, it's the identity of your website, then it splits into yes and then no. So typically, if the URL is going to change, then it's high risk. And so the reason why I said it's high risk is you're essentially changing your identification. There's going to be a lot of work for them to find where you are. Let's just say I've been moving every year. So when I change my address, I need to make sure that all the companies that I'm connected to have their mail forwarded over to this new address. Well, the same thing really has to happen here. So it is the riskier of the two if you only had one or the other. So in those instances where the URL changes and there's no options, no way around it, is let's just say you've got a new domain, right? Typically this happens when you're rebranding, or maybe you finally got the URL or domain that you've wanted. It was really expensive and finally we got it. So now we're going to change the domain name altogether. This is huge because this is essentially going to connect everything and all the URLs are now changing. So Google, Bing, all the search engines need to be aware of, okay, is this the same website as it was before? People have to have that same question too. Oh, now I see that the domain name has completely changed from before. Is this the same company? There's a lot of those risks that come into play there. Another factor of this is, hey, we're going to change the folder structures of the URLs, or maybe it's subdomain, but either way, the folders. It might sound easy at first, but again, the ID is changing. The identification is changing. So Google needs to understand, okay, if this is a new folder, is this the same folder as before? Another situation where the URLs might change is, I guess it would be like subdomains, right? This often happens, let's just say you're an international website, you're targeting the country. And so you have different types of subdomains, maybe targeting that, or maybe you're branching off into new countries. Well, then you've got to create new subdomains, break them out from the folder structure you had before, or vice versa. Same situations. Once the URL changes, you really need to be considerate of that. The other version here is, let's just say the TLD, the top level domain. There's situations where you couldn't afford to buy the .com version, so you went with like a .io or a .co, any of those things. And finally, let's just say you got enough money to pay for that domain. Well, that's going to change the URLs again. So these are really big scenarios, again, like I mentioned. So new domain, folders, subdomains, the TLD, and there's a lot of other ways where the URLs will change, but these are typically high risk. Now we go into the scenarios where the URLs don't change. And not that it's not high risk, but there's some risk, some level of risk, depending on how much is changing. So let's just take, for example, first one that I think of is the CMS. Maybe it's an upgrade or an update. Whatever it is, you decide WordPress isn't enough, we need to go Magento to support the e-commerce functionality. Or maybe you had a previous CMS that was really limiting to create new content, update content, so WordPress might be the way if you've got a blog or whatever that is. Well, that has some level of risk because there are certain URL types that get created by these CMSs. Like with WordPress, there's this media file attachment URLs that get created. Some of them have this inherent issue, and so you have to be mindful of those things. Sometimes the redirect files don't get brought over, so then all the redirects you've created before are lost, and then now Google or search engines are having big issues with stitching together the old version with the new version. You also have scenarios where maybe within the CMS, the design is going to be a little bit different. So maybe the way that the code is structured will change because of the way that these CMSs are built. So these are all risks that you have to consider. Another one here where the URL zone changes, maybe you're doing like big content changes. What I mean by that is you've done this content audit, you felt like we created all these new pages and no one's visiting them. People just kind of had the freedom to create whatever pages that they want. Now you look at it and you've got 90% of your websites that maybe have very thin content. No one is reviewing these pages. It's this bloat that we wanted to deal with. So you go ahead and you remove a bunch of those pages. Well, the consideration there is maybe you get rid of 500 pages on the website because individually they've only driven one visit in the last 3 months. Well, if you multiply that by 500, that's 500 visits a month. So there are those downsides of that. The other piece with content is, let's just say you have very high performing content in the previous version of the website and you decide to change it up altogether. Well, Google needs to understand if this page was initially targeting this topic, what does this new content do? Is it the same? Is it similar? Or is it completely different? We've seen instances where they'll just change the topic altogether and they lose the traffic that they were generating the last 12 months or revenue from that page. And now the new content doesn't fit their model of what this topic should be covered and you lose traffic. So that could scale across all the pages you decide to change. So the main consideration here is if you are going to change content, keep content, remove content, make sure if you do remove it, really don't overdo it. And then on the content upgrade side, make sure you improve the level of content relevance for that page. So another situation where the URLs might not change would be a design update. This will likely happen almost majority of the times in this site migration or a site redesign, and it would be really beneficial if it's a lot easier to navigate the website. But the things you have to consider from an SEO perspective is that the design, maybe you want to get this cool visual, this cool interactive piece on the website, but then Google can't crawl it or Bing can't crawl it because it's in a language that it can't render very well. So that's some considerations where it might look cool to people, but the search engines might not even see it at all. The other scenarios would be maybe the layout changes based off of your design. Well, that layout informs the code behind it. So if you're going to change that, Google and Bing have these expectations of what they want a page to kind of look like with the headers, with the body, with the images. So they're looking for these things. So anytime you shuffle that layout, it's going to change that. So you just need to make sure that you have someone on the SEO side weighing in on these wireframes and the design of your content. Finally, you've got your site navigation. We'll just call it site architecture here. And it is connected to design kind of, but sometimes it's treated a little bit differently. I'm thinking your top navigations or how everything is connected through links. And what you need to consider with that, especially if it's like a site navigation change, is that you may bury certain pages way down. So conceptually, this is what you need to consider. If you're going to make it more work for people to find these important pages starting from the home page, it's likely going to translate into worse rankings, which also means that you'll get less traffic there. So as you are vetting how do you create this new site navigation or how do you have this internal linking play out, make sure that you've got a record of all those important pages and find a solution to make it very easy for people to discover it from the homepage. And ultimately, our rule is 3 or 4 pages or 3 or 4 clicks deep. So looking at some of these do not cover all of them, but now imagine all of these were happening, right? So that increases the level of risk. And for you to at least be aware of the different variables, you can set your expectations with the stakeholders, essentially. It's going to be very important for you to do that because they will only see what they see, but you will be aware of all of the different types of variables that are at play and where you can mess up. So make sure that they are aware of all the things that might need to change or that you need to consider. The next thing that I wanted to cover here is the 3 different scenarios, obviously, to what happens with the site migration, and this is connected to expectations. So you have 3 scenarios, right? You've got this one scenario after the site migration. This is just going to be a general line, and that's that. Another scenario is where you have performance, and then it just kind of drops, and then sometimes it eventually picks its way up. And finally, you have your scenario where you have your traffic and all of a sudden you start to see that improvement, and we'll just call out that this is where the migration happens. And this is that expectation setting that you have to consider, right? In 2 out of these 3 scenarios is actually a win in my perspective. This is a win, and this is a win, and this is what you need to avoid at all costs. This is what you're trying to protect your website from, or your business from going through. This happens when the URLs get changed, they don't get redirected, the content's all different, we didn't port over the domain to the new domain, all of that stuff. This is usually that issue, is caused by that. This scenario here is where you've mitigated your risk. You've done all of the right things. Maybe you didn't necessarily change the content, but you changed the URLs. You maybe changed some of the internal linking, but you kept most of the website. Maybe updated the design a little bit, but made sure the templates were good. Well, this is usually what you'll see, and that is a win. Finally, you have this, and this is a misconception that all site migrations lead to this, but if you play your cards right, and you do a lot of planning, a lot of execution, you have all the right people in the room making these decisions, this can also happen. So let's just say in the scenario that you removed all the pages that are weighing you down. So that's one that you've improved. So now Google is crawling less pages, but they're focused on the most important pages. That's also helpful from users because they don't have to view all these low quality pages. The other scenario could be that on top of that, you've improved the most important pages with the content. You changed the layout, you made it more conversion friendly, but you also made it more friendly for search engines because the header structures, the layouts just all play well. So that's an improvement. You maybe also have made some speed improvements. So that's thinking like maybe the CMS changes or you change hosting providers or whatever that is. Now the site loads quicker. You fixed the internal linking issues in the past. All of that can yield these types of results after a site migration. So when you're thinking about talking about like how to frame this, I would say start here because this is really the goal. But if you are going to be tasked to like, hey, we really want to win after this site migration, after all this effort, then you have to let them know that these are the scenarios that have to play out for this to work, meaning content has to get improved. We need SEO, we need design, we need pay, we need everybody in the room to make the right decisions, and that's where that is. So these are all the types of considerations that you need to think about now that you're probably pressured with this site migration. And really, it's important for you to get clarity from your stakeholders, also from your team, on what you need to worry about, what is changing, so that you can start to plan for that, and so you can achieve these 2 out of these 3 scenarios. Well, hope you guys enjoyed the site migration discussion. We do have a service where we focus specifically on strategic website migrations. That includes making sure your analytics is tracking properly over the course of that. We've got the paid side where they'll make sure that all of your campaigns, your ads are connected even after the URL changes. And then we've got the SEO side where we'll make sure that your templates are what we believe will win. Make sure that you're not removing these most important pages that's driving SEO value, all those things. And so if you have these types of questions, let us know. We definitely would love to hear from you. Thanks.